Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to paint and talk about 3D printed miniatures. Now, around 5 years ago, I first started seeing these 3D printed miniatures popping up, and I always thought they looked pretty terrible, right? They had striations all over them. The detail was pretty lacking. You'd have to sand them quite a bit to even paint them, and they just weren't there. They couldn't match what the major manufacturers were putting out. And then about 2 years ago, I guess you saw manufacturers like Kingdom Death putting out their photoresin miniatures, which had a lot of detail, but they still had those striations, that texture to them that you'd have to sand down, especially on skin areas, or else it just looked a little off, and they just were hard to paint in general. But about a year ago, I guess I started seeing miniatures being posted on Instagram and Facebook from small Etsy shops and Shapeways with miniatures that actually looked really great. Really good detail and not a lot of that texture or striation on the miniatures. So when a small Etsy shop asked if I would paint one of their miniatures, I was quite intrigued, especially when I looked at the 3D renders on their website of their miniatures, and they seemed to be quite of a high quality. But I still expected once I got the miniature in hand, I'd have to do a ton of prep work to get it ready for painting. But then the thing came, and here is the model I painted, and I'll talk more about it. But when it came, I noticed very few issues of texture or any striations on the model. There's only a few places I could even notice it. I didn't even bother sanding it down. And it really got me thinking, like, this is the future of the miniatures industry. I always thought that was kind of a reactionary view. I always felt that no, the major manufacturers are never going to be really impact or in direct competition with these 3D printed miniatures, but I've changed my stance. I really think that in the next 10 years, instead of buying Games Workshop, 40K models, you're going to be buying SLI files to print on your 3D printer. I mean, I just don't see how they're going to be able to compete with this sort of detail, especially for the price point. I'm going to be using this model as a Chaos Spawn or a Nurgle beast, and this model costs $18 on the website. You buy a Nurgle beast from GW, it's $40. Now, obviously, we all know GW prices are inflated, but even looking around at Mantic or any of the other major manufacturers, Kingdom Death, of course, is expensive too. You really can't argue with the price that these 3D printed models offer you. So today, I'm just going to walk you through how I painted this model and probably talk a little bit more about just how impressed I am with the quality of these 3D printed models. So for this model, we're going to first start off painting the skin tones. I'm going to go for what I like to think of an infected gum look to our mouth monster here. So I'm going to be using some purples and pinks, and then I'm going to layer it up to a sickly yellowish white on top of these pinks to really give a disturbing look. So we're going to start off with a whole ton of wet blending since the skin makes up the majority of our monster. So I'm using Scale 75 Artist Acrylic paints here, the violet color and the pink flesh color, and I am wet blending them together. So I'm putting the paint on fairly thick. I really haven't watered it down except from the water that's already on my wet palette here. And I'm putting down the dark violet color in the recesses in between kind of the folds of the skin, and I am putting the pink on top of the areas that I know will be drawing light, and I put them next to each other. Then I wipe off my brush on a wet paper towel, and then I use the brush as kind of a blending nub to then blend those two colors together seamlessly. And I just keep working back and forth, adding more violet when I need the shade of the skin a little darker, and then adding more of that pink flesh in areas that I want to catch the highlight. Just working back and forth until I get a decent blend, until I don't really see a harsh transition between the colors. And then after we get that initial skin tone blended, which took many hours, not gonna lie, we are going to move on to our first phase of layering on highlights. So I just took a very watered down version of that pink flesh, and now I'm going over all of the areas I wish to highlight, all the areas of the skin that I think will be catching light. while I was putting on these thin coats, again, I was just impressed that I can't see any of that detail, any of that striations showing through. I found with my Kingdom Death models, if I was using glazes often, you could see those little marks in the 3D print, but couldn't see them with this model. Since we are using such thin coats of paint here, I did go back with yet another coat of that pink, hitting a little bit less of the skin. So now I went and I mixed a little bit of P3's THRALL flesh, which is kind of a little bit of a greenish yellow skin tone. Looks quite disturbing, and I mixed that into the pink flesh to get this lighter yellowish pink color to the skin. And I'm going back and I'm going to be hitting a lot of those areas that I've highlighted, again using very thin paint here, so it'll flow off the brush nicely and hit all those small areas. For my next highlight, I took a little bit of P3's Sickly Skin, which is kind of a pale white color, mixed it in to that concoction of the pink flesh and THRALL skin that we had earlier, and now I'm highlighting less and less of the skin, doing little striations and also doing a little stippling to get kind of a mottled look to the skin. And then as the final highlight, I'm going in with the pure Sickly Skin color, and I'm just doing little marks, little dots, stippling here and there, just to catch your attention in areas where I think light is hitting the highest portions of the model. And then finally, I'm going over the skin with a nice glaze to tie all the colors together to break up any harsh transitions that might have appeared on the skin tone. For this, again, I'm using Citadel's REIKLAND FLESHSHADE that I've glazed down, watered down quite a bit, so it's only tinting the skin ever so slightly, just acting as a filter. And once we finish with the skin, we've actually done the bulk of the work. Now it's just for the details, the teeth and the tongue and the eyeballs that I'm going to be painting all over it. So we'll start off with the teeth here, and I'm going to use my typical bone recipe, which is Scale 75's Gobi Brown, which is a nice yellowish brown as the base color for the teeth. And then I mix in some of the buff color from the Scale 75 Artist Acrylic range to layer on top of that Gobi Brown. Then we go in with some pure buff, and we're going to hit less and less of the teeth here, trying to hit that ridge to make it look like, again, the teeth are very sharp. And then finally, we're just going in with pure white from the Artist Acrylic range, just drawing a line down the center of the teeth as our final highlight. Alright, now we're going to start painting the tongue areas on this model. And for that, I just laid down some flat black by the Scale 75 Artist Acrylic range. And I'm going over it with Prussian blue, laying a few layers of that down, and then I'll be adding more and more ivory into that Prussian blue and layering up from there as my highlight. get closer and closer to white, we're going to be doing more stippling motion, just to give some texture to the tongue, break up any harsh transitions between the colors. For our final layer, we're going in with pure white and just doing a few dots, a little stippling action along the ridge of his tongue. Then to tie it all together, we'll go back in with the glaze of that Prussian blue, just to tone down the colors a little bit, help with transition. And now we're going to get to painting the eyes, which were perhaps for me the most difficult portion of this model, as I am really terrible at painting eyes. So I started off using some white ink and just layering that over all these bulbous areas of the model, and it will take quite a few coats of that white to get good coverage. Now, once we get some decent coverage with that white, we're going to start painting the eyeballs here. And I've never really had good luck painting eyes. I think they turned out okay here. First, going to start off with some burnt sienna from the Scale 75 Artist Acrylic range. Just try and make a nice circular pupil, getting as close to a circle as we can. Freehanding it here using some very thinned down paint so the paint runs off the brush pretty easily. And then to form the iris, I want it to be kind of a gross looking yellowed eye. So I'm first taking some yellow ochre, which is a yellowish brown, and I am stippling it on top of that burnt sienna so that some of the brown kind of shows through. So again, you have a little bit of speckling along the eye. And then we are taking some Naples yellow, a brighter yellow. Again, we're stippling it more, focusing on the center of the iris so that some of the previous paint layers show through again, giving a speckled look to the eyeball. Now, as we paint the pupil, we're going to go for kind of a human and cat look to our monster here. So first I'll be painting kind of a cat pupil by just doing an ellipse shape down the center of the iris here. And then for several of the other eyeballs here in this region, we'll make them look a little bit more human by just making a circular pupil in the middle, mixing some dark Prussian blue with black for the color here. Now, to give a more realistic look to our eyeballs, we need to put a little glint of reflection in there. So I'm taking just a little bit of pure white, running it on either side of the cat eye here. And then on all the human eyeballs, I guess, we're just putting just a little dot in the corner of the pupil. So in order to get a super gross eyeball here for our Nurgle demon, we're going to get some blood for the blood god and put it on real thick around the base of these eyes here. And once we have it on thick, we're going to wash off our brush, and then we're going to use our brush to pull up from that thick pool of blood for the blood god and pull it towards the iris here. And that will give you little streaks like the eyes are super bloodshot, and it gives a really disturbing look to these eyeballs. And then we'll go back and take some more of that blood for the blood god and put another thick layer down at the base of the area where we pulled it up to form that bloodshot eye. We'll just put it back there so that we have a nice thick coat of blood at the bottom. Then I went and I watered down some more blood for the blood god and decided, let's make these eyes like weeping blood. That would look nice. And so I just take that watered down blood for the blood god, run it around the side of the eye sockets. Then I go and I wash off my brush and just kind of feather out those blood effects so that there's not a real harsh transition between the skin and the blood here. And then for our final step, we're just taking some gloss varnish and going over the eyeballs and the tongues to make them look nice and wet and disturbing. And really quick before I show off the finished model, I just want to give a shout out to the Miniatures Cave on Etsy, which sent me this awesome model. As you can see from perusing their website, they have a ton of really cool fantasy and sci-fi models that you can choose from. And in fact, I think I want to choose this new model they recently put up, which is another Nurgle looking abomination that, again, I might use as some Chaos Spawn or as a Nurgle beast in the upcoming 9th edition of 40k that's coming out pretty soon. So if you're in the market for some pretty unique looking third-party options for your 40k army, I highly recommend the Miniatures Cave on Etsy. And so here is our finished Gaping Maw Chaos Abomination, which I will hopefully be using soon in 9th edition for my Nurgle army. And I'm just floored by the quality of this 3D print. It was a lot of fun to paint. And I think I'm going to be looking at 3D printed miniatures more often as alternative models for my 40k army, especially as GW keeps cranking up the prices on everything here and you're getting less and less in a box. Models such as these are becoming more and more tempting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and let me know what you think about these new 3D printed models that are coming out. Are they enticing? Are you being tempted away from traditional manufacturers towards models such as these? Let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you all soon with a new video. Take care.